Hi guys! So today we're going to chat about Chapter 5, which is interpersonal skills and success. And here I think you'll really see the crossover between good interpersonal communication and success in the workplace. So to start, we will cover building positive relationships in the workplace. And in our first bullet point here says interpersonal skills are important at work. And I'm going to divert back to our text here quickly because I think there's a really great quote here in this section. And this is from consultant Robert Schneider, who contrasts social intelligence with intellectual aptitude. And he says, your cognitive IQ could be 145 and you could get a doctorate in business, but you'll never break away from the pack unless your interpersonal skills are top drawer. So guys, here emotional intelligence and social intelligence are kind of synonymous, but comparing that to your intelligence quotient, your IQ, your smarticles, even saying that you are super smart in whatever field that you're in, knowing that if you don't have those interpersonal skills to couple and share that knowledge, you're kind of taking a back seat to those people that are able to really communicate well and read emotional signals and all those things that come along with interpersonal communication. So we'll talk about those things specifically related to the workplace. First of all, talking about communication climate. And our book talks about climate literally in terms of weather and saying that climates can be very warm and sunny and positive, or they can be very frigid and cold. But really, I think what we're going for here, so we have the beach, which is what we're all striving for and hoping for in our working environment. And I would say there's some people that land here, but few have this sunny beach attitude or the sunny beach climate all the time, right? And then there's people, we would hope we're never in this situation where it's just a frigid, cold, rigid type of communication climate. Really what we're going for, I would think, is where you're sunny most of the time, doing well most of the time, have a positive, supportive atmosphere, knowing that there are going to be some conflicts, this cloudy part that is just kind of hanging over that we have to know how to deal with when they come up. So when our clouds come in, we have to figure it out and how to restore the sun, I guess, if we're going with that weather example. So here we have positive climates that are very supportive environments, and then we can have negative climates that are typically defensive, where people are kind of on edge, walking on eggshells. So in terms of messages, we want to be sure that we are providing very confirming messages. And in our text, this will kind of relate here to when we talk about making praise specific here in a second, but confirming messages are where we are telling our coworkers, our superiors, those under us, we're sharing messages where we are confirming what is done well, we are confirming that hard work was put in, and then if we have some constructive criticism, that we're phrasing it correctly, and we'll get there too. Disconfirming messages kind of really affect someone's self-esteem, put them down, their self-image is put down, their identity is put down, and we want to avoid that. So workplace dignity ties in here, guys. And our text talks about workplace dignity actually pretty heavily, and it says it refers to a person's ability to gain a sense of self-respect and self-esteem from his or her job and be treated respectfully by others. And guys, that doesn't always mean that you're not going to encounter challenges, or you're not going to get constructive criticism, or you're not going to do something incorrectly and need to improve. So there's kind of a balance there between getting all this praise and then knowing that sometimes it's a job's or a boss's responsibility, a manager's responsibility to make things better, right? But hopefully we'll be in a positive and supportive climate where things are presented and in a way that we can advance from and learn from. So here I have a couple of quotes. The communication climate deals with the quality of personal relationships within an organization. So climate deals with the quality of personal relationships. So we always think about our workload or the tasks that we have to complete, right? And really, guys, when it gets down to it, people are more concerned with that communication climate and their interaction on a day-to-day basis. So we can almost always deal with that workload as long as that communication climate is supportive and positive. And then it says, it is the perceptions of the receiver, not the intentions of the sender, that tends to determine whether a supportive or defensive climate exists. So if we go back to that communication model, we know that the sender encodes a message in a code, sends the message through a channel, and it's decoded by the receiver, right? So if the receiver decodes the message with a different intent or a different feeling or a different tone than what the receiver intends, really it's up to the receiver to make sense of the message and interpret the message. So we have to be conscious of how we are presenting information because we want the receiver to take it in the way that we intended. That's where those miscommunications can happen. And we know from our nonverbal chapter that even how we say something can really impact that message. So being conscious of all those things as we move forward. So now we'll talk about giving praise. And so our book talks about sharing feedback here. And the first is giving praise. And we want to praise promptly. So right away when someone does something well, we want to be able to provide that positive feedback. Then, guys, we want to make this praise specific. So on page 120, our text gives us some examples. So the first one is, good job on handling that complaint. So you might have provided that praise very promptly, very quickly, but we can make it even better. You could say, you really kept cool, calm, and collected when the customer complained. So you're providing more detailed praise back so that the person knows exactly what they did well. And we want to correspond that over for negative stuff too, kind of twisting that around with I language, and we'll talk about that here in a second. You want to praise progress as well, so not just perfection. And guys, I think that's kind of hard to get into our minds. So for instance, in my public speaking class, I might have somebody that's always been just a very phenomenal, top-notch speaker, the best student I've ever had. It's very easy to praise that person and say that they did extremely well, excellent work, great job, right? We need to also recognize that there are public speakers that really grow in that first introductory class, right? So maybe they're super nervous and hardly look up at the audience in speech 1, and by speeches 3 and 4, you can really see that growth where they're starting to connect with the audience and have more confidence, exude more confidence. And there, it's important to acknowledge their progression and even those elements that are verging on perfection. So making sure that we are acknowledging not only perfection, but also growth and improvement. We want to praise intermittently, and our text says too much praise can sound insincere. So you want to be sure that you're really picking out and then being specific about certain things and kind of doing it sporadically rather than all the time. We don't want it to go to a blind ear. Okay, and then relaying praise next. If you already believe that complimenting someone sincerely can improve the communication climate in your relationship, wait until you see the benefits of singing that individual's praise to others who deserve to know. So if you think back to an example where you've been complimented and then others start to share and kind of your network grows and learns about the compliment, even sharing something on social media. So if you share an accomplishment on social media and then your parents share it and then people commenting on that, that just makes you feel good, right? Your network is growing and that compliment is wide-reaching. So you can do that same thing in the workplace, relay praise. And then you want to praise sincerely, and I think that goes back to praising intermittently. So when you choose to praise someone, whether it's for progress or perfection, we want to make sure that it's really coming from the heart and really specific and tailored to that specific person. Alright guys, so next up we'll talk about using descriptive I language. So we always want to avoid kind of pointing a finger at people. If you think about the last time you got into an argument, it's very easy to slip back into this you evaluative type of language where you're saying, you did this, you did this, you did this, and you're just like really pointing a finger and you're coming up with every possible thing you could point out about this person, right? So we want to switch that back over and really be conscious of our you language and try and use descriptive I language. So our text says, rather than focusing on the other person, you should instead use descriptive statements often termed as I language. I language is phrased in a way that focuses on the speaker instead of judging the other person. So we'll talk about an example here And this is from Cerner Corporation. It's an American healthcare company, and it's based out of Kansas City. And I'll show you the example of the message here in a second. But the climate after this message was so hostile that the message was forwarded onto Yahoo Financial message board. And not long after, the stock in the company went down 22% after this notice was sent out. And here is a very clear example of you language. So it says, this is a quote from someone within the company, someone probably high up within the company. It says, "We are getting less than 40 hours of work from a large number of our employees. The parking lot is sparsely used at 8 a.m., likewise at 5 p.m. As managers, you either do not know what your employees are doing or you do not care. In either case, you have a problem and you will fix it or I will replace you." So you notice I've kind of put the yous in red, that there is a lot of you language, a lot of judgmental language, a lot of pointed language, right? So if we think about switching this over to use more positive I language, more descriptive I language, you could say something like, "I'm worried about the number of hours our employees are working. I feel like the parking lot is sparsely populated during working hours. For a company that's doing exceptionally well, I feel like we can get more out of our employees." So do we see the difference here in tone just from this example to this example? And we can obviously see which one would be more well received within the people of the company. So here's another example from a website talking about you versus I language. So this is from Tony Robbins with Robbins Research International, talking about words matter and basically this you versus I concept that our text covers. So for example, here are some you statements. "You are such a slob, you just expect me to clean up after you." And these are arguments or statements that all sound familiar. So you statements, such as those listed above, are phrases that begin with the pronoun you and imply that the listener is responsible for something. They show no ownership of emotions, but rather blame, accuse, and assume the receiver. So I statements, on the other hand, and guys, you can't see all of this, sorry, force us to take responsibility for what we are thinking and feeling and prevents us from blaming our partners. With I statements, we can still be assertive, but find a less hostile, more compassionate way to communicate. So turning a you statement into an I statement. And here are some examples. So you statement, "You don't care about me, you are inconsiderate, you never make time to call or text." And guys, this is based on relationships, but you can see the crossover here into the workplace. So changing that into an I statement, "When you don't pay me attention or call me, I feel disconnected and lonely." So there's still a you statement in there in this example, but we're getting a little bit better here by saying, "I feel disconnected and lonely." You can make it even better by saying, "I feel disconnected and lonely when I don't hear from you during the day." Something like that. Here's another you statement. "You don't help out enough, you just expect me to clean up after you." And there's another you here, so we'll try and make it even better. When you don't help out with the housework, I feel overwhelmed and underappreciated." So I feel overwhelmed and underappreciated, and I wish to have a bit more help with the housework. Okay, so just changing the tone, changing the feeling of the message there, switching from you language to I language, which is easier said than done, but something that we can always improve on and be conscious of. All right, so continuing on with our discussion of communication climate, we'll talk about how we need to focus on solving problems and not controlling others. So even if you are a higher up or a manager or the lead of a project, you never want to wield your power and just say that you are going to solve the problem, let's do it my way, let's get it done. So you always want to be sure that you're building that rapport, building that positive relationship and that climate with those that you're working with, your colleagues, to make sure that everyone is on board. So we want to use a problem-oriented style where we really search to find a problem that suits everybody involved in the working relationship. And that again is one of those things that's easier said than done. There are strategies to accomplish that we'll talk about here towards the end of the chapter. But our text says we need to aim at solving both persons' needs. The goal is not to solve a problem either my way or your way, but rather to develop a solution that meets everyone's needs. And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about win-win negotiating styles. So then going on to be honest, don't manipulate. So even 1 in 500 times that you might stretch the truth or lie a little bit or beat around the bush, that hinders your credibility and makes those around you question what you say. So even when what you have to say may not be the most popular or the best news, it's best to be upfront and honest. Again, probably trying to soften that message and come up with a way to present that message in the best way possible, but still being very honest and not manipulating those around us or the message in general. All right, so communication climate, we want to show concern for others. So indifference, lack of acknowledgement, or concern for others is likely to trigger a defensive reaction. In contrast, a genuine message indicating interest can do wonders. So going back to offering sincere praise, it goes here too. So showing concern for others, really making sure that you have that personal relationship and that you're willing to share, that you care for one another, that you're there for one another, and that you're working together to either fix a problem or accomplish a goal, right? So also, guys, we want to demonstrate attitude of equality, and this section in our text is started with this statement: neither talent nor job title justifies arrogance. And I think that's a great quote to show that it's important to demonstrate an attitude of equality. So when expressing ourselves, we want to pay close attention not only to the words we say, but also our nonverbal behavior. So going back to our tone, our facial expressions, our posture, all of that stuff. So demonstrating an attitude of equality, really paying attention, and being active listeners to those around us in the workplace. Lastly, guys, we want to keep an open mind. So when raising difficult issues, it pays to approach the situation with an open mind, willing to hear all sides of the story, willing to negotiate and work things out. So a couple examples here in terms of communication climate and these 3 bullet points. Showing concern for others. So you'll notice in some communication instances where someone maybe doesn't have your best interest at heart or isn't concerned with helping you, and how frustrating that is. So if you think about big purchases, like if you've purchased a car and someone maybe isn't showing concern for your trepidation in making such a big purchase and are only concerned with the sale, they're not concerned with your feelings and you individually. Or you go and ask for help in a certain store or department and they say, that's not what I do, but they're not willing to help you find that correct person and set you up in the best place for success and to get the help that you need. That's frustrating, right? If you go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, I can't help you, you'll have to go here. It may be true, but it's still frustrating that they're not showing the concern and helping you find the situation or find the solution. So we always want to show concern for others, show that empathy, and then demonstrate the attitude of equality. So in our example earlier with the boss that used you language, can you turn that around and use I language, but also position yourself within the group that may have a problem? So I think we can fix our working hours by making sure that everybody is there at 8 a.m. Maybe we'll start providing coffee, some incentive to be there earlier in the morning. What are your thoughts on that? So opening that up to the community, the workplace community at large, asking those questions, and then keeping an open mind to be able to receive some feedback there and show concern for your workforce and the people that you see day in and day out, right? So communication climate examples there, very important to show empathy, equality, and an open mind. When offering constructive feedback in the workplace, it's important to consider who will be giving and providing that feedback. So typically management or those higher in the hierarchy will be presenting that constructive feedback and offering some criticism to improve. So considering who will be giving that information, because some people will just be more receptive to the message coming from one person or the other person. And then you want to consider the relational climate. So typically all constructive feedback should come within the workplace, dealing with the workplace. So is it acceptable to bring up personal issues? Probably not, unless it's really impacting or reflecting upon the workplace environment. So you want to keep things very professional. Consider again who is providing that message. We also want to consider delivery. So we want to deliver feedback in a face-saving manner, and typically this will be done in private. So maybe pulling someone aside, asking to meet in the office. So it's just one-on-one, delivering some feedback. You're able to explain, provide some support for the feedback, offer some tips to improve, all those things. And then you're avoiding any embarrassment that might come from offering or providing constructive criticism in a group setting or in a larger office setting. You want to avoid looking and sounding judgmental. So again, that goes back to that you language, pointing fingers, switching it over to I language, and trying to be as specific as possible in offering that criticism. You want to really listen, so often we'll learn more listening than speaking. So listening to any feedback that the person has about the constructive feedback, any reasoning, any questions that the person might have. And then guys, sometimes emotions bubble up when constructive criticism is offered, so always remembering to keep calm, keep professional, go back to that positive climate and trying to build that rapport with that person and make sure that they are comfortable in that setting. If we are on the opposite end of receiving constructive criticism, how do we respond to criticism? So in seeking more information, some good things to do are ask for examples or clarification, guess about details of things, paraphrase, and ask what the critic wants in return. So talking about seeking more information a little bit more here, I think these things all kind of tie together and kind of lend themselves to one another. So when you ask for examples or clarification, you might paraphrase. You might say, well, you said this. Can you provide an example of when I did this? Or you said this. Can you provide some clarification as to what you meant in what situation? Things like that. You might guess about details, so maybe they were a little bit vague in their criticism, so you might guess and ask if it was based on a certain situation or if it was based on your tone of how you spoke to a customer, those kinds of things. So you can guess about the details, and maybe that'll start to pull out some more details from the critic themselves. You might again paraphrase what that person had said just to make sure that you are understanding and receiving the message correctly. And then ask what the critic wants. So your text gives the example of how do you think I should behave differently around customers. So again, you're kind of guessing about details there. You're asking questions, you're asking clarification, but making sure that you're not afraid to respond to criticism by seeking more information. I think that's how we grow and learn and improve, right? Alright, so some more notes here on responding to criticism. Sometimes we just need to agree with the criticism. We need to agree. Sometimes you just can't refute facts. They are true things, and you need to agree and say, yes, that did happen. Sometimes maybe you really don't agree with what was presented and the context, it's taken out of context or something along those lines, but you can agree with the perception. So agreeing that you understand where the person is coming from. And I think that ties to establishing common ground. So finding areas where you can both agree and then working for a cooperative solution. So in working for a cooperative solution here, we want to ask for a chance to state our point of view. So yes, you've established that common ground, kind of got on the goodwill of the person, their good side of the person, and then you ask for a chance to explain what happened from your side. And then you're focusing on finding solutions and not finding a fault. So after you've shared your side, you want to really still be professional and calm and say, okay, so this is what I think happened, this is what you heard, I understand your perception there, what can we do about it? So moving past the problem and finding a solution, trying to avoid, again, pointing fingers, using new language, going about it in a positive climate with effective descriptive I language. All right, shifting gears here, we will talk about dealing with difficult people in situations, specifically talking about incivility and workplace bullying. So going more in depth here on what incivility means, your text says incivility is the exchange of seemingly inconsequential, inconsiderate, words and deeds that violate the conventional standards of workplace conduct. So there's an example in the text that says, when I was out on disability due to a severely broken ankle, my supervisor wrote an obnoxious letter about my injury. He was trying to be funny, but it was very disrespectful. I guess some people got some laughs from it, but I didn't. So thinking about there, typically it's the people in higher power positions that conduct incivility and sending these types of messages. But knowing, guys, that this can be as simple as checking your phone during a meeting, just those impolite things that we need to be conscious of. Connectedness is another thing that our text talks about. Cyber civility, so rude or discourteous behavior occurring through communication technologies. So these are the things that we just need to be conscious of and make sure that we are, again, thinking about who will be receiving the message, how the message will be interpreted, are we being respectful and sensitive of people's needs, and this communication context. Is this a meeting where it's a little bit more laid back and I can check my iPhone, or would it be very rude of me to be on my phone in a very important business meeting? So again, manners, politeness, morals there, really thinking through our actions in the workplace and the messages that we send both verbally and non-verbally. So then, guys, talking about workplace bullying. So workplace bullying takes incivility to a new level. So whereas incivility can be relatively mild and unintentional, workplace bullying is more intense, malicious, ongoing, and damaging. So because of the intensity of this abuse, bullied employees are likely to leave the organization in an effort to avoid the constant aggression and humiliation. So bullying can come in several forms that our text talks about: aggression, criticism, deviousness, that's like passive aggressive behavior, and gatekeeping, so like controlling your resources, those kinds of things. So workplace bullying, again, taking incivility a step further. I'm sure we can think of examples of incivility in our own lives, possibly where you have to repeat yourself all the time with a certain person or colleague, because they never take the time to put aside what they're doing and actually listen to you and pay attention. Maybe they send emails at 3, 4 in the morning because that's their sleeping schedule, but they're very inconsiderate of the other people in their group that maybe don't wake up until 6:30 and choose to check their email when they get to work at 9 a.m. And maybe that person that's sending emails early is annoyed that they have to wait for responses. Those are just things that you kind of have to juggle that are different between each communication culture and each workplace. Workplace bullying, guys, is a whole new thing where it's really affecting your quality of life because what's happening in your workplace is taking such a toll. So again, aggression, criticism, deviousness, gatekeeping, all those things. So then we'll talk about ways to deal with workplace bullying. And the first is one that we have to be very cautious of. So negotiating with the offender. So you kind of have to do a risk-benefits analysis here and make sure that you have really the power to take this step and that it's a smart step to take. If something is happening to such a high level, maybe negotiating is not the best bet. Maybe you need to appeal to a third party there and ask for help. They can manage the situation, help you, represent you and your best interests in dealing with the workplace bullying. Maybe you decide that retreating is the best bet in that specific instance. So some strategic options include communicating via phone or email whenever possible rather than in person. So you're just backing off on your communication there. You're not negotiating, you're just kind of pulling back and really trying to keep things at a distance. You might reframe your thinking. So when you are the target of demeaning communication, it is easy to start believing you somehow deserve the abuse. In the world of business and professions, there is no justification for bullying or consistently acting uncivil. So never getting to the point where you're burying yourself in the bullying, and making sure that you are speaking up and appealing to a third party, maybe negotiating with that person, maybe backing off a little bit, but always, guys, coming back to, is this really taking away from my quality of life, and what needs to be done to accomplish some form of a solution here. So never going into that hole where you're thinking that this is just kind of how it is. Reframe your thinking there and have a proactive approach to bullying. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission discusses sexual harassment, and here's what they say. So, it is unlawful to harass a person, an applicant or employee, because of that person's sex. Harassment can include sexual harassment or unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. Harassment does not have to be of a sexual nature, however, and can include offensive remarks about a person's sex. For example, it is illegal to harass a woman by making offensive comments about women in general. Both the victim and the harasser can be either a woman or a man, and the victim and harasser can be the same sex. Although the law doesn't prohibit simple teasing, offhand comments, or isolated incidents that are not very serious, harassment is illegal when it is so frequent or severe that it creates a hostile or offensive work environment, or when it results in an adverse employment decision, such as the victim being fired or demoted. The harasser can be the victim's supervisor, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, or someone who is not an employee of the employer, such as a client or customer. So keeping all of these things in mind as you go through work environment situations, I hope that you never encounter any of these situations, but knowing that if you're seeing sexual harassment or if you are being harassed, that you know what constitutes sexual harassment and what doesn't. And then now we'll talk about what to do should these situations arise in the workplace. In terms of responding to sexual harassment, first of all, guys, sexual harassment has been around for a very long time, unfortunately, but in recent years it's become more and more prevalent to report sexual harassment and to take legal action. And so a lot of businesses, corporations, schools, companies are really set up to, again, handle these sexual harassment complaints. So responding, first of all, consider dismissing. Is it serious enough to constitute sexual harassment? So going back to that last source there, this source here, U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, thinking things through. Is it really sexual harassment? Might I be overreacting a little bit? And if not, then you need to take these next steps. It's very serious if you are being sexually harassed. The next thing you might do is telling the harasser to stop, so just making it known that it's unacceptable to you. Maybe you write to the harasser a letter explaining how it makes you feel very uncomfortable and it's not acceptable in the workplace, it's not acceptable for your own relationship, etc. And you really want to keep notes about what is happening. You want to make sure that you're not forgetting certain things and that you have evidence of sexual harassment and sexual harassment behavior. Then, guys, we want to ask for third-party intervention. So at the university level, perhaps it goes to your professor if it's happening in a certain class. Then it goes to the department head, then the dean. And there is really a chain of command, and that chain of command works quickly. And that is the same in most corporations, businesses, and most workplace settings. So sexual harassment claims are taken very seriously and handled immediately. So asking for third-party intervention is a great way to go to get fast action. You will not be taken lightly there. Use company channels. Again, those processes are set up. You can go so far as to file a legal complaint, and I would say most companies are probably right there with you in helping you file that legal complaint. Oftentimes, human resources and HR will be those company channels that you're working with that will help you to file those legal complaints and follow those company policies set forth in terms of sexual harassment. All right, so we talked about various approaches to conflict, all of which have positives and drawbacks in situations where they might fit best, situations where we have to be cautious about how we're approaching, and maybe we should try a different style, right? So reading through the text there and really working through and thinking of your own examples, we've all encountered a lot of conflict in our lives, and we probably could have handled some things better, and in some instances we really handled things well. So think back, ruminate over those. Did you avoid, accommodate, collaborate, compete, compromise? And now we'll talk about negotiating in terms of handling conflicts really constructively. So the first negotiation style here that we'll talk about is win-lose. So in this approach, basically one side of the argument wins out and the other one loses. So when you think about this, you're like, oh, there's one side that loses. They didn't compromise, they didn't meet in the middle, it's not a win-win, right? But here it might be something where a boss or a person in the business had asked for different ideas to solve a problem, and they vote on it and one wins and the other proposals lose. So that might be a logical way to solve a conflict or approach a problem in the workplace. Other ones here, guys, are lose-lose, and this comes out of that competitive approach to conflict, kind of that cutthroat approach. And typically, guys, with lose-lose, there's expensive outcomes on both ends that can really hinder growth in a company and all those sorts of things. So lose-lose, we usually want to avoid going into compromising here. And this is where you fight competitively, but you don't want to risk the lose-lose outcome. So you want to find an attainable outcome and distribute resources between both sides. So your book gives the example, if two managers each need a full-time assistant, but budget restrictions make hiring two new managers impossible, they may have to compromise by sharing one employee's services. So again, they're each losing a little bit, but you're still finding some common ground, so it's not as heavy as lose-lose. And then we have win-win. So this is where everyone involved is satisfied in handling the conflict. And this is what we're going for. So win-win outcomes are ideal, but they're not always realistic. So table 5.4 in your text is a great resource in terms of considering a competitive and a win-win approach there. Okay, so now we'll talk about preparing to negotiate as we move into trying to solve problems. So first of all, we need to clarify interests and needs. So our books is to focus on ends instead of means. So you want to think, what are we both trying to get towards in the end? So where can we meet in the middle? What is the goal to solve the conflict? And then how can we get there? So you need to clarify what you want done, but knowing that there is that final goal that you want to both achieve. And so, for example, maybe you want a raise and you feel like you are putting in the time or have the skills to earn that raise. So your end goal is to make enough money to satisfy your skills and what you do in a certain company. So you want to approach your boss, and there in the end, they want those skills and they want the products or the work that you are willing to and can provide. So that's your end goal, is to have quality work and compensation for that work, right? So then you have to clarify how you want to get to that point. So you might say, I am willing to work 5 more hours a week to earn more pay, but I would also like this percentage of an increase in pay. And then maybe your boss will come back and try and compromise and negotiate with you a little bit there. But figuring out that end goal and then the means to get to that end goal is really prevalent in preparing how you want to negotiate and what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Then you want to consider the best time to approach the person that you're trying to address a conflict with. So for instance, maybe you know that your boss has a lot of corporate meetings on Tuesday mornings. Maybe you want to avoid Tuesdays in general in terms of approaching him with this topic because he might have other things on his mind. He or she might have other things on their minds. Maybe usually on Monday afternoons, they've kind of set aside some time to answer questions, or they typically answer emails at that time. So maybe it's a good time for you to shoot an email and ask if you can set up a time. Maybe you want to do that in advance so that they know and set aside time in their schedule. So always considering when can you have their full attention, when is a good time to approach the topic. We also want to consider cultural difference and sensitivities, and we've talked a lot about this in our previous chapters. So going back to, is time important? How is it high or low context culture? All those things. So taking in all those cultural considerations as you prepare to negotiate. And then again, you want to prepare your statement. So you've come up with your interests and needs and the final goal that you both want to achieve and that you're both willing to work forward. You've set aside a really good time. You've considered any outside factors. You're ready to go. So then we'll move on to handling conducting this negotiation. So we've prepared, now we're going to actually conduct. So we want to identify both parties' goals, then you want to brainstorm those solutions, evaluate solutions, and then you want to implement and follow up on those solutions. And if we have prepared well, you're going to kind of already have brainstormed what the goals are and started to brainstorm some solutions, but then always remembering to be open-minded to hear the other side of things and kind of work through and evaluate those solutions. Your book gives a really good example here of negotiation in terms of handling childcare and personal responsibility of your employees. So identifying the needs of both parties. So the employee is seeking that their children are cared for after school, and the boss doesn't want the employee's productivity to drop in caring for their kids. So really, both want to keep the employee on the job and to also keep a positive relationship, right? Because the employee doesn't want to lose money being away from work, but they also don't want to be distracted from work or pulled away from work because their kid is unsafe or something along those lines, right? So again, the goal is to keep the employee on the job and keep a positive relationship. So in thinking about brainstorming solutions, the employee could do some work at home during non-business hours to make up for the time after school. The company could offer flexible working hours so employees can get their job done and still care for their kids. The employees could share full-time position with another coworker, or the boss could subsidize after-school childcare on the assumption that productivity would rise. So you can see there where there's some lose-lose in some situations, there's some win-lose, there's some compromise, but really negotiation, if you're brainstorming all of these solutions, you just want to get them all out there and think through all sides of the argument. Then you can evaluate and think about the give and take there, and then implement and follow up on those solutions when the best plan is chosen. Okay guys, a lot happens, a lot covered in interpersonal skills and success. If you have any questions, send me a note, and then I will see you soon for our next chapters. Study hard for your quizzes and tests.